Hi everyone, this is a video to talk about how to write your IA. This is a simplified video. If you need more detail, please refer back to your IA information booklet and the rubric that is in it and every information in it. Now, um, your IA portfolio, let's start with that, is requires you to write 3 commentaries to be submitted to the IBO. Each commentary is based on different sections. You have in economics 4 sections: micro, macro, international trade, and development. Each article must be a maximum of 750 words. You need to abide by this, guys, because this is related to criterion F in your rubric. This is the rubric. You have this rubric in your information booklet. Regarding the structure of the IA itself, an IA is very simple if you break it down into different subsections and think of how each subsection is related to the criterion in the rubric. So you start with your IA with the terminology. So you want to start your IA with a good application from the text. Now, so you can start with the word the article discusses, introduce what the article is discussing using the quote of a key sentence, or you can paraphrase. Both are good application grades. Now, you summarize the article briefly with the sentence, 2 or 3 sentences. Do not waste words on your introduction or terminology. You want to be using all of your words in the evaluation at the end. Okay, so be as brief as possible, but as efficient. So you summarize the key idea in the article in 2 or 3 sentences and use economic terminology. You need to define 3 or 4 terms. No basic terminology. Do not define demand. Do not define supply. Define the terminology that is relevant and write them in bold. Okay. Now I'd like to use the IA on the side here that is written by a previous student on development. So the student started with the application of the main idea that the article is discussing how Egypt has allocated kaza, okay? And the paragraph continues with the terminology. So terminology is defined through the text. You don't need to state the sentence. It is defined as, do not waste word as that. And after defining the 2 terms here, the student has drawn the graph. Now, as you can see, the graph, this is the examiner's comment, and there is good application and the axis on the graph. So if there are no numbers in the text relevant to your graph, you don't need to, but if there are numbers that are relevant, then use it on the graph itself. So the student has applied well the axis on the graph and labeled it with a good title. Okay. After that, the explanation of the graph in ABCD, again, very brief but very efficient. And then figure 2, which is showing another graph. So these are related to the structure of the IA. So paragraph 2 show a graph of the problem before the government intervention presented in the article, and paragraph 3 is about presenting the graph, so a graph for the intervention, okay, of the government. So in both of them include any application from the text. In both of them have a clear explanation of the ABCD. Some students draw 3 graphs, but it's good, but it's not advisable if it's going to jeopardize your evaluation. So 2 graphs are enough. Okay, again, the axes are labeled. Good title for the graph. The graph above demonstrates you explain the theory. Through your application, if you feel that there is something that you can use from the text in your ABCD, so in this case, the graph above demonstrates the interventionist policy impact on the Egyptian economy. Its government spending is a factor of aggregate demand. Thus, the 4 billion Egyptian pounds increase the government expenditure, etc., etc. So, just a simple word in the application, in the explanation here, shows a good application. And again, the ABCD. And finally, after the graphs are explained, the final paragraphs, which are the most important ones, which are related to the evaluation. You're expected to evaluate the impact of the policy in depth, and then you evaluate again. It should be in depth. Do not be concerned about mentioning all the possible points that could be mentioned, but be concerned about mentioning everything in depth. So, evaluation in terms of advantages, disadvantages, pros and cons on the different stakeholders, long-term, short-term. These are examples of an evaluation, and you could present your final judgment in 3 or 4 sentences at the end on the validity of the solution presented in the article and whether you think an alternative solution should be presented. Okay, so how is this done in this IA? So all of this paragraph, intervention of policy, achieves economic growth, achieves increase in output, achieves productivity, the project cycle will be broken. All of this is just the advantages, and this is what I mean by in-depth. On the other side, there are limitations arising from the policy in regards to the new budget decides to allocate it to healthcare. So this is talking about how the government spending will have an opportunity cost. Now, the student doesn't just stop here, he goes in depth and mentioning that Egypt includes various underdeveloped segments, how this opportunity cost is relevant, how this opportunity cost could have been used in infrastructure, could have been used in building and developing projects. So this is an example of how in-depth your expression of the disadvantages are. You can also mention the long-term, short-term impact, and finalize with an alternative or your judgment on the solution. Okay, mention your word count at the end of your IA. Okay, and as you can see, it's less than 750 words. Okay, so let's go on to our next video where we talk about the practice IA.